All right. Evening, everybody. Um, I think we're at the stage of fun with Houthim. Uh, I love it that they announced today after we bombed the port with 12 bombs that they were able to intercept, and the Zionist entity is flying away. And then I'm sure they're going to say tonight they destroyed 5 airports, and it's just a joke. Thank God. Thank God it's a joke.
Agreed.
Yes. Yeah. Um, hey, at least it wasn't in the middle class. They were nice enough to. I called them up. I called the Houthi. Listen, if you're going to do it just before 7, so we can get it out of the way and move along with life. So it was very
That was
nice.
kind of them.
Yeah, yeah, like really righteous Gentiles. Yeah. Hey, vey. Okay, so let us begin. Let me get myself set up here. Move this over here. Add this here. So Um, last time we spent talking about Moses Mendelssohn, the Enlightenment slash the Haskalah, the Maskilim, the people who followed that new derech, and we also talked how it spilled into became eventually known as the Reform movement. Now tonight we're going to do is we're going to talk about something happening. Oh, we're allowed to leave the merchab. The whole thing is over. Okay, I'm sure you were really worried. Okay, good. Um, we're going to talk about how the emancipation in Europe spread under Napoleon Bonaparte, and then what that did for the Jews, and how there was a disagreement if it was good for the Jews or not good for the Jews. That's been our question for centuries and centuries. This happened and that happened. Just tell me, is it good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, the fact that she endorsed this thing, Mamdani, is it good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? Depending on your perspective. If you want to get Jews out of New York, it's a good thing because he's going to get elected probably. It's if you're staying in New York, good luck, Charlie. Plus, he also today, this guy Mamdani wants to. He's going to be getting rid of the official understanding what anti-Semitism is. So it's also fun. Anyways, that's not what tonight's class is about. Napoleon Bonaparte, 1769 to 1821. So again, the reason it's important to know those dates is the time frame of the late part of the 18th and the early part of the 19th centuries is remembering everything that's going on at this time. Is this the time of revolution? The American Revolution, French Revolution, what's going on now as far as France, he rises, Napoleon rises, and this is the history lesson specifically about Napoleon. So this is just in very general terms. He rises from obscurity to become the emperor of France. Lahavdil, Hitler, Yamashimo, rose from obscurity as well, and to end up becoming who he became. But I don't want to compare Napoleon to Hitler. That's obviously not a good comparison. In any case, wherever the armies of Napoleon were to march, he brought emancipation. He brought more freedoms, and which led to in Italy the ghetto gates came down, walls came down. Germany had more freedom and beyond. But Napoleon also sought to control Jewish life. He convened what became known as the Assembly of Jewish Notables in early 1800s, 1806, and later it became known as the Great Sanhedrin, taking, of course, the name of the High Court in the times of the Beit HaMikdash. And the purpose was, you might think, oh, we're going to see how we're going to seamlessly have the Jews become part of French society and all their freedoms, but we got to check something first. And once they get, what is it they have to check first? They want to know, are they going to be loyal citizens first and Jews second? Meaning, when called for country or duty, do you take into consideration France first and the emperor, i.e., Mr. Napoleon, or you're Jews, and therefore what is good for the Jews and what's good maybe for at that time, we'll just call it Israel for lack of a different term at the moment. What is it you're going to do? Now, this is a already a form of anti-Semitism, even though it was not necessarily seen that way. This is to this very day where you have discussions in the United States, especially when you talk about dual loyalties. And this phrase dual loyalties, you will see if you just Google it. I didn't, but I'm sure you Google it, you get thousands of hits. And to understand, you'll see, I'm sure, a tremendous amount of anti-Semitic comments on that as well. Um, are you going to be a person who's going to think about what is best for Israel or the Jews? Or are you going to feel what's best for the United States? One of the theories behind why the president and vice president of the United States have to be born in the United States is they shouldn't have these dual loyalties. There's an act right now, or a bill going through Congress about extending that to Congress as well. I mean, personally, I'd be against that, but that's for different reasons, not to do with Judaism. In any case, what are Napoleon's policies as far as the Jews? Now, again, Napoleon had all kinds of fun stuff and wonderful things about France and his role as the monarch and all, but as the emperor. But we're concerned about what was it regarding the Jewish people. So he confirmed that the Jews would be considered emancipated like all other people, except, and to borrow a line from Animal Farm, everyone's equal, if some people a little bit more equal than others. And that the fact is that the Jews were restricted to, they didn't allow them to do any money lending for the purpose of being an encouragement the Jews to start doing farming and to get into the trades. Now, does that mean that the Jews were doing a lot of money not laundering, God forbid, probably that too, but money lending or not? Probably not to the extent that the emperor saw it, but again, as far as seeing things through the eyes of the stereotypes of what Jews were, he had that in his mind. He said, look, you're not going to loan money anymore. You're not going to do money lending. We need you on the front line, so to speak, in the agrarian society that they still were, farming and trades, and that's where you're going to become. He asked the rabbis to declare that Jews would see France as their homeland, and if required by civil law, would intermarry with non-Jewish French. Now, that's a real giant step. I'll tell you why. First of all, it's telling that Napoleon is telling the Jews, you may have what you think one day will be a homeland. Remember, this is the very, very, we talk about in Israel's Reshit Simichat Geulatenu, the very first flowering of the Geulah, of the redemption. We're not even there yet. We're at the very beginning of what will eventually be known as the movement, the Zionist movement, is still in diapers. It's not even, it's maybe in conception right now. It's not even there yet. And to stave off anything that Napoleon was worried about, the Jews' loyalties, is look, Jews have to say France is their homeland, and that they would intermarry if declared required by law. Compare that to the Nuremberg laws, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with and we'll talk about down the road, where the Nuremberg laws actually did one thing that was good, and that was it prohibited Jews from marrying non-Aryans. He also wanted to transform Judaism from a nation within a nation to a religion, meaning there's Catholics, there's Christians, there's Protestants, and there's all these others, and there's Jews. But overall, you're all just French subjects or French citizens. This great Sanhedrin that he convened, these rabbis had to affirm their loyalty to the country, to France, and they declared that Jews would intermarry civilly. What did that mean? It was a loophole. The rabbi saw it as a loophole that they could get married on a civil level to a non-Jew, but there'd be no rabbinic validity whatsoever to it. It wouldn't be considered as they were married Jewishly. It was two sides of a coin. On the one hand, it was a triumph. It was a triumph because they were accepted as citizens, but it was also humiliation because now they're denying their national identity, which for the Jews was obviously a huge, huge thing. If you go back to the 13th century, going back just a few hundred years, for those of you who've learned the Kuzari, I gave a class in Kuzari for a couple of years, many years ago. There's one paragraph in there, and it's something I quoted so many times. I know it by where it is by heart. In Amartu, in the article number 2, paragraph 20, paragraphs 24 and 25. The king of Khazaria, let's just say it's somewhere in Asia. If you don't know the background of the story, just it's okay. Right now, you don't need to know it. Who's not Jewish? He's trying to find a religion for his people. He's talking to a rabbi, and the king says to the rabbi, "I'm confused. You have if I, you've explained to me some of your prayers, and many of them include the idea of we want to see with our own eyes that God returns to Zion, and it's all about Israel and Israel and Israel. And what are you guys doing here? Basically saying, what are you doing in Chutz La'aretz? And the response in paragraph 25 from the rabbi is, Hovashtani hamelech. You have embarrassed me. You're right. And everything we say is nothing more than tziftzuf hazarzir, which means the twittering of birds, which unfortunately is true for a lot of people. There are many people living in Chutz La'aretz who really do want to be in Israel. They do recognize this as the homeland. They, for various reasons, they can't be here yet. And there are others who couldn't care less. And that's their business, not mine. At least not on a public forum like this. It's not my business. So, in a sense, what was being said centuries before, and the perspective of an outsider, is creeping in over here because Napoleon is telling the Jews, you can have all these desires you want, but no, that's it. France now is your homeland. This is your motherland. And if I'm not mistaken, Hitler Yamach Shemo was the only one who referred to his country as the fatherland and not the motherland. And I don't remember the reason behind it. We'll get to that, I guess, one day. In any case, there were debates among certain members of the rabbinic world, the Hasidic world, the non-Hasidic world, as to the veracity or the goodness or lack thereof of Napoleon's granting this form of emancipation to the Jews. In other words, they were free, they were citizens, but they had an asterisk next to it. By the way, it's asterisk, not asterisk, from the word aster in Latin, meaning star. They have an asterisk next to the title Jew. And you see in the subpair, and the little below the line, it says, except for this, this, and this. So Shner Zalman Liadi, the Alter Rebbe, the Admor HaZaken, the author of Tanya, opposed Napoleon. Now, remember, this is one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years. We've talked about these various year, where we talked about these personalities, and now we see how these personalities interact with what was going on at that time. We talked about the founder of the Chabad movement, the Shlomo Zalman Liadi, and now we see he pops in with what's going on with Napoleon. He prayed for his defeat, and because he believed that emancipation of the Jews would just bring material comfort, spirituality would go, it ends up in the garbage, and it would be terrible for the Jews. That was what he believed. On the other hand, you had Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, another person we've learned about recently. He actually welcomed Napoleon and his statements. He saw freedom as a blessing, this kind of freedom for the Jews. Even though in parentheses, and there's an asterisk next to the name, he still saw it as something positive for the Jews. So was it a political freedom? Was it a gift from Hashem? Was it a spiritual trap? Each person who reads history would have to come up with their own perspective of that. But he did open the gates for modern Europe for Jews, not just France, but the ideas that he was getting into in France spread through Europe as well. And it forced the Jews to look at themselves, do a little introspection, and to redefine who they were. Were they Frenchmen of Judaic background? Or just the eternal people of Israel? No, it's the famous line, are you Jewish American or American Jew? What's the difference? So in English, in most languages, you have a noun and an adjective. A noun is the person, place, or thing. For example, a phone. Adjective describes that. So you have a black phone. It describes the phone. It's a good phone. It's a bad phone. It's a broken phone. So you're describing the phone. But the ikar, the main thing, is the phone. It's how you're describing it. So if you're a Jewish American, then you're identifying yourself. Your essence is you're an American. You're a Jewish American. You're a white American. You're a Democrat. You're a Republican. Whatever it might be, but you're an American. If you're American Jew, or insert any other name of a country, by definition, you're Jewish. That's your essence. That's what you believe you are and who you are, whether you believe it or not. You are, and the modifier or the adjective is that you're Jewish, is that you're an American. so that you're accepting and you're validating the fact that Judaism comes first. And this is what they're struggling with at this point. Am I a Frenchman who happens to be Jewish? Am I a Jew who happens to be a Frenchman? In 1815, Napoleon falls at the Battle of Waterloo, and there is a massive reordering of Europe. You'll note that this is not the first time. This is maybe one of the first times I'm mentioning it, but in the past this has happened, and it will happen multiple times between now and after World War II, when what will be an upheaval in Europe. The maps will be redrawn, whether it's because of World War I, was the Treaty of Versailles, or it's going to come up after World War II, or it's going to be the fall of communism. You take a map from 1990 and you look at the USSR and Yugoslavia and all these. It doesn't exist anymore. It's a totally different reality, even though maybe Russia's trying to to realign and get back what they lost at some point. They're having some fun with Poland right now. Yes. You want to say something?
Me? May I?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
The Jews did not have a nation. They couldn't be binational. They didn't
Correct.
have a pope, so it wasn't like they could follow
Correct.
a pope. So I'm
Correct.
just curious, what was Napoleon, other than maybe leaving and taking their resources with them, what was Napoleon fearful of with regard to the
Very
Jews?
good. Very good question. Okay. So I'll answer you with a pasuk from Parshat Shemot. Hava nitchak malo. Let us be smart about this. That Paro was concerned. Now, Jews don't have a homeland when they're in Egypt. They have a religion. They have their God. They don't have there's no Torah officially yet. What's Paro concerned with? That they'll get attacked in Egypt, and the Jews who will rally around themselves and rally around and join their enemies and go. It is a nation within a nation. We are a goy. We were a goy bekerev goy. We are one nation inside of another nation. So on the one hand, Napoleon is not concerned that they're all going to make Aliyah overnight, because there is no place officially to make Aliyah. There's no, quote, what we call modern day Israel. There is a land. There is a historical connection. Napoleon isn't foolish. He knows his Bible. So that there is some draw potentially that one day the Jews say, you know what? We're out of here. We're going to take, like you said, the resources. But in every century that we've talked about, where the Jews are part of the community or part of, no matter what, there always is, until you get to early, before World War II, they're a tremendous contribution to the communities they're in, which is why the whole boycott movement really is so smart, brilliant. So they're concerned with this, not in dual loyalty as we use it in today's terms. There's going to be America, or there's going to be Israel, but to an idea, to an ideal to go towards. And if it comes down to it, their Judaism versus their Frenchism. There's no such word, I know, but I'm making it up. Okay. So 1815, Napoleon is, as we said, is defeated at Waterloo. And there's something called the Congress of Vienna is restored, and it restores the old monarchies of Europe, where the monarchy, where you had the kings of France and all, it gets restored. The revolutionary movement that was the emancipation and the idea that freedoms and all, it starts to wane. It starts to go down the tubes a little bit. It was rolled back, this idea of freedoms of the emancipation. Ghettos in some cities are reinstated, by the way. I'm not just talking about Jews. And when we do talk, we'll have to understand what the word ghetto comes from Italian. We'll have to understand really what it means. And various restrictions are imposed, especially on the Jews. But the Jewish world really changed forever, because it's really one of the first times the Jews in Europe had such a great latitude of freedom, which we talked about last week and we're still talking about now. It was a taste of freedom. And once you have that taste, it's not forgotten so easily. So there was a mixed legacy to the emancipation. In France, for the most part, the emancipation remained more or less intact. Not exactly, but more or less. Germany, as far as the Jews are concerned, in Germany and in Austria, the Jews lost many of the rights, and they returned to some form of ghetto existence. And this term, we're talking about the ghetto. We're not talking about forced Jews being put into an area like the Warsaw Ghetto and that was over time made smaller and smaller. And I'm going to tell you a story about that in a minute. And smaller. We're talking about that the Jews had to live in a certain area. They weren't, with armed guards to shoot them if they left the ghetto. And in Eastern Europe, there was the whole upheaval of the Chassidut and Mitnagdim and the encroaching Haskalas. It was a tremendous time of upheaval. Brief story about the Warsaw Ghetto. When I was in Chicago, so for I think it was 8 years in a row, and they're still doing it, but it was 8 years when I was there. The Federation in Chicago had an idea and came to me and one other rabbi that they wanted to take rabbis from Chicago, the greater Chicago area, Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform, fly to a city in Eastern Europe, learn the history of the place, the Jewish history in advance. We had like a course for a few weeks on the city, then go to the city, learn about the old history of the city, look at what the Federation was doing in the city, and then from there it'll be there for 4 days, and then fly to Israel for another 4 or 5 days, and Shalom Yisrael. It was incredible trips. I had the opportunities to go to a place I never would go the rest in my life. Truly amazing. But one anecdote sticks out every single time I mention the Warsaw Ghetto. I think about this, and I want to share it with you briefly. I was one of out of those 8 trips, 7, I think, I was one of the group leaders, which is nice. The Federation treats you very nicer and you get a nice room, but there's a lot of work involved in the prep and everything on the ground as well. And Thursday, which was going to be the end of the trip, we were in Poland and we were going to go make one stop on the way to the airport and then from there fly overnight to Israel. It was just like you see in the movies. It was cold. It was always in January, cold and snowy and icy and it was you'd leave in the morning like at 6:30 in the morning, 7 in the morning. You wouldn't get back till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Exhausting. So we were on the bus on the way to the airport. We were going to make one more stop. And the scholar in residence traveling with us from Chicago was explaining, we're making one stop. I'm not even telling you where we're going. We're making it on the way to the airport. And we get to the place, and I'm just sitting in my seat in the bus. And he said, Zev, why are you sitting there? I said, I can't move. I am exhausted. So he took me by my kind of winter parka kind of thing and a hat. He took me by my coat, pulled me up, says, get up. You will regret it if you don't. Not that he's going to hit me, but you'll miss something. So, where are we? He says, you'll see when you get outside. We got outside. We start walking, whatever it was, however far it was. And he takes this flashlight. He starts shining it on a wall. Turns out we were standing in front of the last remnant of the Warsaw Ghetto wall. And he told us to put our hand on the wall. It's like, that was kind of weird, but okay. So I put our hand on the wall and we're talking, and he's telling a little bit of the history. We get on the bus and we get onto the airplane and we fly to Israel. From the airport, we got off the airplane, got into a shuttle bus, went straight to the Kotel, and I put my hand on the wall. And he said to us afterwards, and I think about it like it's so powerful. We went from a wall of powerlessness at night and to this wall of power the next morning. And it was like, I've thought about that story many, many times. I've been to the Kotel, obviously, many times since, and I almost always think about that story. The fact is that it was the remnant. It wasn't current. That's also important. The whole question, let's go back now to our topic. The whole question of were Jews loyal first to their religion? And by the way, one of the other answers to the question you asked is, if you're more loyal to your religion than you are to France, then if France passes laws that don't coincide with your beliefs, that you're not going to be a good citizen because you're not going to follow the law. But so the whole question isn't resolved. I mean, to this day, it's not. For many people, you consider yourself, an Australian Jew or Jewish Australian, whatever. What I want to just spend a few minutes more on is this idea of Reform Judaism. We touched on it last time, that the Haskalah leads to, because Mendelssohn was Reform Judaism light, and it morphed, it changed. There was a big change in the 1830s to 1840s It went more beyond just aesthetics. So we talked about one of the things they wanted to change in the Haskalah was to move, I think we mentioned this, the bima, instead of being in the middle of the shul, to be in the front of the shul. The Nodi Yehud, I think, wrote a tshuva against it. It's terrible. Having the bima in the very front, in front of the Aron Kodesh, some other aesthetic changes. But in 1830s, 1840s, to go a little bit further, which I touched on just briefly last week, is that halacha is not binding in the literal sense. It's very fluid. The idea of a messianic national restoration. The Messiah is going to come and we're all going to flock to Israel and we're going to have sing kumbaya, gone. That's out the window. And Judaism is a religion only. It's not a nation. It's not a peoplehood. Therefore, if it's just a religion, there's no rallying point. There's no central focus where the Jews need to be. There was a conference called the Reform Rabbinical Conference in 1844, where it codified many of these statements or ideas, which were obviously very heavily influenced by the Maskilim. In other words, the Haskalah broke the monopoly of traditional authority. It normalized criticism of halacha, and then the Reform movement comes along and they institutionalize that into a new theology. What does that mean in normal English? The Haskalah was, the people of the Haskalah, of the Jewish Enlightenment, were willing to step up and say, we need to make some changes. Most of which were cosmetic. Some were a little less cosmetic. But then along comes the Reform movement and say, we're going to go much further. You don't know what you're talking about. There's so much more we need to do. And they make massive changes into their beliefs, which we talked about. The fact is the most egregious, of course, is that Torah is not Minas Shemayim. It's godly inspired, maybe, but it is not Minas Shemayim. I'm going to show you one slide, only one tonight. Let me go back here a second, put it on screen share. I find it. This. Okay, I made a slide of the evolution. Hopefully it makes some sense. Mendelssohn's Haskalah. Let me make this a little bit bigger, so especially if you're on your phone, it'll be easier to see. There. Mendelssohn's Haskalah was the Enlightenment, integration, secular knowledge, but still considered more or less observant. In a modern eyes, we might call him, what's the word, open Orthodox, or left, very left of the Orthodox world, but he was still considered more or less Orthodox. And again, the Enlightenment, the idea of some more freedoms for the Jews, bringing secular education into it. Then was the Maskilim of the little bit of radicalization, downplaying ritual, promoting cultural Judaism, criticizing rabbinic authority. That's never changed. And then some practical reforms. Sermons would be in German, not Yiddish. Synagogue decorum, aesthetic changes, like I said, the movements, especially of the Bima, was seen to be a big move. The introduction of the organ as well. Then theological reform. By mid-19th century, Reform Judaism fully detached from halachic obligation, redefining Judaism as an ethical monotheism adapted to modern life, i.e., really messing up what we call normative Orthodox Judaism. Got stuff here. That's and you. Okay. I want to take a step back because the next major topic we will talk about, we need some history, general history, and then the Jews within that history, the Jews specifically of England. We are working towards the eventual, what's it called? Dreyfus Affair. If you know what I'm talking about, great. If you don't, also great. Something to learn. The eventual Dreyfus Affair, Theodore Herzl, who was present there, and the life change it makes for him, and then eventually for the concept of Zionism, the birth of various early Zionist movements. But in order to understand that, we also have to go back a little bit and understand a little bit about England in general, for about 100 years. Let's say the 19th century, basically. The Jews of England at that time, let's just round it off, 1800. is a very small, visible, but socially marginal community. No more than approximately 20,000 Jews lived in London at this time. There's some other small communities, Portsmouth and Plymouth and Bristol, but they were at that point, again, you're talking 225 whatever years ago, if I'm doing my math right, I hope. But they were like tolerated. Remember, there's still a form of emancipation, is still because of the Enlightenment and Napoleon's influence as well. So they have some, they're tolerated citizens, but because they're Jews, again, they have an asterisk next to their name. Don't forget, the Jews were kicked out back in the 1200s. Oliver Cromwell comes along, grants them some rights later on down the road. It's still not until not that long ago the Jews were completely considered normative citizens in the country. But they lived under certain civil restrictions in England. They were excluded from Parliament, which became a very big problem for one person, which we'll talk about him in a moment. Someone by the name of Rothschild, whom you may have heard of. They were excluded from Parliament. They were not allowed to attend universities in Oxford or Cambridge, the two of the top universities in the world, and still are considered very top. And they were not allowed to hold most public offices. If this sounds a little familiar, it should. We're in the 1800s. It's going to be in the early 1900s, again, with the Nuremberg laws and others and Nazi Germany, before it becomes Nazi Germany and everything else, and before the actual Holocaust and all that. Many of the same exact things are happening where the Jews are excluded from public office, they're excluded from universities, they're not allowed to be in trade, they lose their citizenship overnight, which happens to actually spark the early spark of World War One. The Jews, there were two kinds of communities at that time in London. There were the Jewish poor. They were in Whitechapel and a couple other areas. It was crowded. It was dirty. There were hawkers and peddlers and secondhand dealers and all these pictures you might have in your mind. Schmachte business, rag picking, old clothes dealers, street vendors, and they would get by on meager subsistence. Think the early 1900s and the Lower East Side of New York, and whatever. There were some small shops. There were tailors and butchers and bakers, and they served in very crowded districts. Those occupations that we're talking about were stigmatized. They not produced, what's the word I'm looking for? Promulgated the stereotype of the Jew as being unclean, unscrupulous, parasitic, meaning that the types of jobs they had and the conditions they lived, it would just perpetuate. That's what the word I love. Perpetuate the stereotype of the Jew. Alongside of the Jews who are poor and downtrodden and all, there is another community. There was the elite. There were the Sfaradim who had come to England from the Iberian Peninsula, from the exile. Remember, 1492, we talked about this months and months ago, the Jews, as the Spanish Inquisition, as the Jews being kicked out of this expulsion of Jews from Spain, who go to Portugal and other, which in the Iberian Peninsula. Eventually, they're kicked out of there, and they establish a shul in called the Spanish Portuguese Synagogue in London, the Bevis Marks Synagogue, probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, in London. Again, I have only been to London to be through the airport once. That was more than enough for me, especially today. No, thank you. Nothing against the Jews of London, nothing against London people who marched in over 1 million people against all the policies right now of the government, which is called more power to them. But there really was a significant distinction between the Ashkenazi communities and the Sephardi communities. The Sephardim who came with money somehow or made money and were able to bring it along with them, and what they established in their communities versus the Ashkenazi communities, which were less wealthy, and their life centered around the great synagogue in Duke's Place. Both Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities provided not only religious places, meaning shuls, but also Jewish Burial Society, welfare, tzedakah organizations, arbitration services, charity organizations, what they call Taimche Shabbos organizations. There was still tremendous social prejudice against the Jews, whether they were being prejudiced. The prejudice was because they were poor and therefore they were dirty and cheap and money hungry and all that, or they were rich and they're avarice and they're the money lenders and they want is their money and the big hook nose and the bags of money. These pictures, these ideas, these stereotypes will massively grow in the early 1900s, especially as you get into World War I and then especially in World War II. And now all you need to do is go online and see the same exact things that are coming right back into vogue around the world. But again, because they were Jews, therefore they are barred from full civic life. They not only could not hold office, they were not allowed to vote in municipal elections or serve in local government. The Jews could naturalize as British citizens, but only through an act of parliament, meaning a person who was born there who's Jewish didn't automatically become a citizen. There had to be an act of, in the United States called an act of Congress. Here there was an act of parliament to become a citizen, or to become a British citizen, and it was considered expensive and rare that it would happen. The promise of the Enlightenment, which was civic equality for all, seemed to be very far from its realization. Now, if you're familiar with the book I mentioned before, not Lord of the Rings, Animal Farm. I don't know, Lord of the Rings popped in my head, but Animal Farm. It's not about this time period. It's more about communist Russia and the whole idea of communism and equality, and some are more equal than others. But there's still some of this in the back of our heads when we're hearing about this period. But even in this period of restriction, even while things are being tightened around the Jew, the future transformation, the seeds are being planted right now. A handful of wealthy Jewish families who made a lot of money in finance and in trade lay the groundwork for future integration into society. Remember, this is before Napoleon. This is still just as a outgrowth of the emancipation still. And eventually some of the British politics would erode some of those barriers that are preventing Jews from being able to hold office and others. But what happens next? That's basically the first 30 years of the 1800s. The next 30 years become a turning point because Britain itself is experiencing political reform, industrial expansion, urban growth. The Jewish community is drawn into those processes as well. The Jewish population begins to explode. And now, during the past 30 years, when they started with about 2,000 Jews, by the middle of the century, by the mid 1800s, there are 35,000 Jews already living in London. A lot of it is strengthened by immigration from Central Europe. German Jews in particular played a vital role who had migrated to London. Some arrived already as educated professionals, merchants, artisans, shopkeepers, and they bring their trade, their knowledge, their finance, their wealth, they bring it with them, and it helps the society. Every society that has been good to the Jews has been prosperous. No surprise, we were told this in Parshat Lech Lecha, when Hashem talks to Avraham Avinu. And he says, those who bless you will be blessed, those who curse you will be cursed. We can only hope that all is being cursing us today will be cursed. The central, again, we took a step back. We're still before, just a little before Napoleon. So the central issue, political issue for the community was this whole idea of emancipation and the restrictions that kind of didn't seem to fit with this whole idea of emancipation. The Catholics are given rights. The Protestants are given rights. The Jews don't have the same rights. So from the early 1830s, there's a whole campaign to allow Jews to sit in parliament. And there's a man whose name you may know, Lionel de Rothschild, is the famous Rothschild family. He's elected to serve as MP, which is like Chaver Knesset here, for the city of London. Problem, he can't take his seat because he has to take an oath that ends with the words, on the true faith of a Christian. Can't say that. So he can't take his office. He's elected, but he can't take office. This goes on for 20 years that he's reelected and he can't take office. What happens is the parliament is deadlocked. In the House of Commons, they supported reform. Let them take an oath without having to mention Christianity. In the House of Lords, they opposed it. They said, no, this is the way that we have always done it. This is the way it's going to stay. In 1858, we're not talking about the 3rd century. We're talking only less than 200 years ago, 175 years ago, or whatever the math is. They reach a compromise. Each house, whether it was the House of Lords or the House of Commons, could decide the form of oath its members would take, and therefore it permitted Rothschild to enter parliament without having to swear the Christian stuff. And it was seen as a huge triumph for Jewish emancipation, because now they had somebody of their own who was part of the official government. At the same time, the life of the Jew in the day-to-day community was being reshaped. The influence of the Germans who had moved into the area of, in general, into England, but especially into London, brought new religious ideas. This is where they're starting to bring the Reform congregation, the Reform idea. The West London Synagogue is founded in 1840. It's the first official Reform congregation in Britain. And the members of this synagogue, in quotes, are upwardly mobile German Jews, interested in a less rigid form of worship, buying into the whole idea of what would be considered Judaism. And of course, as we mentioned many, many times, strong resistance from the Orthodox chief rabbinate. Okay, we're going to stop here. And we're going to, Bezrat Hashem, pick up class after the Chagim. There's the possibility of something in the middle, but I just decided, instead of having start, stop, I'm just going to wait until after Chagim, the week after Bezrat Hashem. So what I will do is to just wish everybody not just a Shana Tova. I want to repeat something I've said on more than one occasion. And that is, and if you've heard this before, sorry, you'll hear it again. We say to each other, Shana Tova. We translate have a good year, right? So the word Shana, Shin Nun He, is the root or shoresh of two other words. One is lishnot. Lishnot means to repeat something, like v'shinantam levanecha, and also lishanot, which means to change. So when you say to somebody, this is I thought of this a few years ago. I've never seen it anywhere, but I think it's true. When you say to somebody Shana Tova, you're really saying to them that you should use the proper and the good meaning of that Shin Nun He. It should not be a year coming up lishnot, just to do over again and again what you did in the past, but rather lishanot, to make a change. Not in everything. You're not going to, trust me, you're not going to change everything overnight. It doesn't work that way. But something, pick something that's easy and something that's more challenging. Challenge yourself. Don't say, okay, this coming year, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to remember to floss really well, because my teeth have to be good to be able to eat, so I can eat on Chagim. Give me a break. Okay, very nice. But there are things that every one of us can do to make changes, and don't set yourself up for failure. So when you say Shana Tova, we're talking about a lishanot. Make some good changes in your life. Bezrat Hashem. Should be a great year. Bezrat Hashem for all of us, for all of Am Yisrael, all the Chatufim home, all the people who've been injured. Refuah Shlema, some nechama, some form of consolation to all the families whose loved ones have fallen. And Bezrat Hashem, the Jewish history is going to be written as we go into this new year with God willing, with Mashiach. It's going to be Tafshin Pei Vav. So I said again, someone may have already said this. It should be a year of being fruitful and multiplying, not just in terms of children, but in Judaism. And we should grow, we should flourish as a nation, and that we should be seen around the world, not as the pariah state that we seem to be becoming, God forbid, but as truly the Or LaGoyim, the light unto the nations. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Amen. Amen. And thank you. It's very
Beautiful.
interesting.
Thank you.
so much. Thank you. Beautiful.
Let's love everybody.